Good afternoon everyone, my name is Hendry, the owner of Cape Carnivores, and welcome to my nursery. Come have a look inside. So this shade house here is the core of my growing operation, where I really grow a lot of my Nepenthes, my Drosera, some Utricularia, some Tuberous Drosera, Orchids, and other interesting things, such as this Nepenthes Peter Domata crossrob Cantley from California Carnivores. So a little bit about the shade house. It's primarily a wooden open structure. It's not a greenhouse necessarily, as it's constructed only using shade netting instead of a plastic film or whatever, or anything that would seal the greenhouse fully. So it's made by 6 wooden frames covered with shade netting, a 40% shading in front and 70% at the back. And then on top of the roof there's polycarbonate sheeting to keep the worst of the rain off. That's about as close as it gets. So I don't do any temperature control, any humidity management. It's all pretty much ambient, just a bit more shaded. It's about 5 meters end to end and 2.5 meters across. So it gives me a growing area of about 12 square meters. So I have a big bench on my left, which is where I keep the majority of my Drosera and some Pinguicula. And then over on the right hand side, I have some of my more interesting Drosera, Dices, and the majority of the Nepenthes. And right at the back, I have some Orchids. So let's have a closer look at some of the more interesting things that I grow in here. Okay, so starting off strong, we have Drosera regia, the king sundew. This is one that everyone is probably quite familiar with. This plant is probably already at least 25 to 30 centimeters tall. I got it last year from a friend of mine, Ryder, grown from German seed by Christian Dietz. It's a magnificent plant. It's starting to come out now from winter dormancy. You can see the new leaves unfurling right down here in the middle. It's an incredibly sticky plant. This horsefly here found out I hate horseflies, as you'll see in some of my other videos. So he got sent straight into hell on the Drosera regia. It didn't bend as much as I hoped it would. It's still interesting nonetheless. I grow quite a few Drosera regia. I have a few different clones, my favorite of which might be the white flowered form. This is still quite a small plant from GreenhouseTour in Germany. So this comes from one wild plant that was collected decades ago, most likely by a German, and thankfully I was able to bring one home. This is apparently a weaker growing clone than some of the other ones, probably because it's wild. And it has this nice white flower instead of the typical pink that you see for Drosera regia. Another group of plants I'm particularly keen on is a winter growing Drosera. This is Drosera variegata from the Tratra Mountains near the Bido Valley up north in the Western Cape. Unfortunately these have finished flowering. You can see the lovely pink buds here. So these are winter growing plants, so they grow in the winter and spring months. They flower around now in September, early October, and then eventually when it gets hot enough they'll go dormant down to the roots. I'll make a video on how to care for these soon. These are some of my bigger plants that I grew from tissue culture that I deflossed last year, put them through their first dormancy. Now they're growing magnificently. I have a few other winter grows here, such as Drosera trinovia, the small sundew. These have lovely cute little white flowers. We have Drosera cochipetala, which is most commonly known with a red flower. This had a very bright pink. It's quite a small rosette. These are starting to approach the end of the growing season. Also have Drosera zahari, which is a bit taller, has a bright pink flower. I'll add some photos into the video. This bud still might flower again tomorrow. I have another Drosera sistifloriform, a few more, a new species that I'm going to describe soon. And then a very tall Drosera sistiflora from Newvartville. This plant is already past 30 centimeters tall. It's a really huge form. It should have a kind of salmon pink flower. I think this one has one small bud, so if I'm lucky it will flower for me later this year. So over here I have some of my Australian Tuberous Drosera. They're starting to grow a bit late now since they came over from Europe, such as Drosera macrantha, a very tall climbing species, and a lot of Drosera aberrants. You can see they were a little light starved under my bench, so I've got these very long stems before the actual leaves grow. I've got some of the more interesting rosetted ones like Drosera erythrorhiza or Drosera tuberstylus. I've also got Drosera erythrogine, which grows incredibly tall. Let's make a frame. In the wild, I think they've been found up to 2 or 3 meters in height. So they're only starting to emerge now, such as this other Drosera tuberstylus that are just breaking the surface. How I store my tubers is under the benches. I keep some crates with all my pots in. I store them dry, because if the tubers are too wet over the dormant season, they start to rot. So I keep them in these trays under the benches, and the moment I see life sprouting, I pull them out. The rest of the time they're kept under here. Same goes for the winter growing Drosera. In the summertime when it's very hot, I try and keep them out of the sun. I don't keep them as dry as the tubers. So here we have an interesting natural hybrid, Drosera admirabilis cross capensis. These are both very wet growing species, and we get what effectively looks like a mini capensis. Capensis is often quite strong in the hybrids, so this is one of the smaller ones. I have a few others sitting here, such as Drosera ex Capiciae, which is Drosera capensis cross Sarracenia, which ends up with what is effectively a broadleaf capensis. This is also from GreenhouseTour in Germany. I mean, his mother plants get pretty large, around this big. It's similar to the Drosera ex Hercules, which I'll show you now. I also have another weird one, which is Drosera Sarracenia cross capensis. Drosera Sarracenia is a very xeric dry growing species, so this is quite an interesting hybrid. It has very weird round leaf shape, very compact and squat. This I got from Christian Dietz in Germany as well. And just to show off the Hercules, a few large specimens. This is Drosera Hercules cross Self and F2. The original Drosera Hercules, I believe, was created in Australia, and this is the second generation on from then. So these incredibly big spear-shaped leaves. Looks very much like a normal capensis otherwise. The stipules are capensis, the leaves look like capensis, but it's probably a selected hybrid. So they picked the nicest looking one. I'm sure others in the batch looked more like Aliciae. But as we've seen on the other crosses, capensis is typically very dominant. So a few other interesting South African things here. I have Drosera venusta. These are some small seed-grown ones from the Tsitsikamma ranges in the garden route of South Africa. Also have some nice small Drosera admirabilis, seed-grown. I struggle to maintain these long-term. Maybe I don't like the sandy mixture so much. There's a really cute round plant. You can see it cute as a button. Also Drosera cunifolia just over here that I grew from root cuttings. I used to have an impressive plant that was about 8 centimeters in diameter until I tested fertilizer on it and killed it. Then lastly in this tray I have some Drosera Aliciae out from my tissue culture. This is a really nice one from Hanmanis with reddish tips to the leaves. And growing alongside them I keep them seed-grown Sarracenias. These all came from Insecticide Nursery in the US. So these are now entering the second season of growth. They're all less than a year old. With some heavy feeding they get quite large. See next to a hen, it's already getting quite big and still need to be repotted. I think my favorite so far is this Leucophila Wilkinson's monster across Leo Wilkinson. Getting incredibly big already. This plant here has some really nice venation. So I'm growing Sarracenia from seed. It's important to pick some good color and good vigor. Sometimes the biggest ones aren't always the nicest looking, or any which way around that. Moral of the story, feed your Sarracenias very heavily when they're young. They'll get big for you in no time at all. So moving over to the Nepenthes, I focus mostly on intermediate and hardy hybrids. Since I grow outside, I thankfully do not have frost, but it still gets quite hot in summer, cooler in winter, to deal with the rain and pretty moderate humidity. This first one is Nepenthes ventricosa across Fipiata. These are incredibly robust little pitchers with a lovely peristome. Quite toothy on the inside as well. It's really nice. I'm growing them in this interesting cocoa coir and perlite mix. This is a buffered, washed and graded coir. It's not the typical salty stuff you can pick up for reptile bedding and other potting. So the low salt content seems to work really well for these. I've been trying it for a few weeks now and so far it's promising. I can't recommend it until I've finished long-term testing. Sitting here next to it is one of my favorite Nepenthes. This one actually belongs to my girlfriend. It's a Nepenthes Mr. Smee. It's Spatulata bihamata, and that crossed again to Spatulata. It's this amazing multicolored peristome, lovely reddish body on it. Takes a bit of a long time to grow the pitchers, but it's really well worth it. Got some nice fuzzy stuff on here, which is the perks of growing outside. You get spider webs, cobwebs, slugs, snails, other good stuff. So good management is key here. Another one of my favorites I'm growing is this unknown seed-grown species. It's in the kind of Fusca complex, I believe. Got it from a good friend of mine, Volted. These lovely long tubular pitchers. It's growing incredibly well, even as a species growing outside. It's very hardy and starting to really pack on some size now that spring is here. And I think my favorite plant in here, if we look up, is my Nepenthes alata. This thing must be almost 2 meters tall already. It's making these incredible speckled pitchers. It's now moving towards uppers. Upper pitchers, you can see they're quite a bit lighter, less coloration and very green peristome. But unlike other Nepenthes, Nepenthes alata keeps the wings the whole way through. Alata means winged, so it's really going up. It's got 2 vines now, one is as tall as me, and the other one is probably well past 2 meters tall. If it doesn't flower for me soon, I'm probably going to have to cut it. Further along the bench, you can find some nice stuff, like again the Nepenthes Peter D'Amato across Rob Cantley. This was bred by California Carnivores in the United States. Got a lovely truncate leaf from the Rob Cantley parentage. This beautiful golden color on the peristome and the speckled interior. This is by far my biggest one of the cross. I have one other plant in here somewhere. It's doing stupendously well. Another plant I'm quite looking forward to are the seed-grown Nepenthes spatulata cross Jacquelinii, cross truncata peltata. These are some of my selected plants for the color and for the vigor. I have a few more hidden around. This is a really interesting intermediate to highland hybrid, but it's really tanking it out here. I start them in these seed trays, and when they get big enough I transplant them out. So these are some of my runts, but they're growing quite well now that spring is here. And the secret for the Nepenthes seedlings is to transplant them as often as possible. The bigger the pots, the better they do. So I'll move on from them. I also have a lovely seed-grown Nepenthes ventricosa. I know it's an odd thing to be excited about from seed, but it's already starting to get nice coloration. This is my biggest one. We got a little jumping spider hiding under the leaves. My actual ventricosas, up here they're vining. I have 2 flowers coming. This one is definitely a female, and this one I've yet to see. It's a nice reddish one, and still waiting for the next flush of pitches, since ventricosa does it in waves. My last probably interesting species over here is Nepenthes maxima, which needs to be supported to make some uppers. I got this from a great friend of mine, Odin. He has some amazing plants, cool carnivores. Check him out on Instagram. This maxima has a nice light peristome, bit of ribbing. I'm not sure what the origin of this one was. It was quite a nice one nonetheless. The rest of my Nepenthes here is kind of nursery stock. It's European common hybrids like your Brixianas, your Gaia, the normal European Alata clone, a few other locally produced things. Also grow a few orchids, such as this Maxillaria variabilis, a small yellow flowered Maxillaria. Has really nice sort of clove scented flowers. See one here and there. So it's apparently well flowering, has lots of new growth. The rest of my orchids over here are still getting into the springtime. Quite a big fan of Sarracenia. The ease of growing, these you really can't go wrong with. This is Sarracenia hartmannii, the only species I have, and it has no less than 1, 2, 3 spikes coming out from a plant that only had 1 last year. I've had some hybrids that you can pretty much divide every year into 3 or 4 new pots. So these hang right at the back, still working on the irrigation system for misting them. This bench has nice irrigation sprayers that I've set up when I'm not home. Nice foggers that rain up and down. Lastly, in the corner I have my hodgepodge of my girlfriend's aroids and other dry growing orchids I struggle with, such as Grammatophyllum. Barely got rained on this season and all the leaves rotted off, unfortunately. Whereas Grammatophyllum citrinum is doing much better. The leaves are not super happy. These are warmer growing species, but hopefully this one continues to grow nicely. And then if you're really wanting to run out of space, get into Helianthera. So out here in these humidity domes I have my extras. They're a bit embarrassingly bad looking. They take a very long time to acclimate. There's some nice new growth coming out here. There's stuff like Helianthera nutans and some other Cephalotus, such as my Holland clone plants that I've been acclimating, adjusting from Europe. An interesting thing with Cephalotus is they root super well in perlite. These are some cuttings I started, and they're starting to get new leaves coming out of the base here. A good trick from a friend of mine. It does take a long time though, so be patient with your Cephalotus. There are some nice bigger ones also from the Holland clone. These are big clumps. Those of you in Europe, I envy your cheap Cephalotus piles. It's already nice and big, hardening off. Everything with Cephalotus takes a long time. They're a plant that rewards patience. Continuing from where we lost storage space, I have a nice Darlingtonia from Greenjaws. I'm curious to see how these do in summer, trying to use a terracotta pot for evaporative cooling. I should actually do some experiments and see how well it works, but so far this plant looks very happy. Some others not so much. I've got a nice assortment of market pinguiculae here I bought from a friend of mine. They seem to tolerate being outside pretty well. And lastly, I have my regia farm. So I bought, much to the amusement of other conference goers, a lot of Drosera regia, even though I live about 2 hours from their home range. This is the Big Easy Cross Sol from Diflora and some Big Easy from Giardino Carnivora. So hopefully this grows nice and big, eventually do comparisons. And maybe my favorite plant in this tray to finish it off, the Cephalotus from Greenjaws, the giant Dr. Eberhard Quinnig clone. It's had 1 leaf and has made a nice picture. The pictures get huge, about this large. It's one of my more expensive plants outside. A division of this will set you back about 100 euros. For the South Africans, it's about 2,000 rand. So that's all for the inside of the shade house. We can have a quick look at the things outside and sign off there. So to finish off, we have a bit of my outdoor growing space where I keep my Venus flytraps and my Sarracenia and some of my Drosera. It's one of my favorite pots, this Drosera capensis from Hofberg. This is a unique clone, not the same ones that are mostly in cultivation. I have sent seeds around of this plant. You can see it's huge, about 20 centimeters tall, and they're only starting to grow nicely now that it's summer. When it gets really hot, I should start getting good red coloration. They're not as red as the ones that are in cultivation already. So here's some of my nicer selected seed grown stuff that I'm planting out. All my European Sarracenia are still waking up. Flytraps I'm a bit new to. Got a few nice cultivars, got a few sale things, some big plants. But what's really interesting to me is this enormous Drosera lusitanicum. So this is one of my pride and joys, the dewy pines. Let's find some sun for them. They smell incredibly nice, almost like honey. You can see some of the bigger plants already, bigger insects, quite attracted to it. And interestingly, this is grown in some renosterfelt soil, renosterfelt being shale clay based. So this is some shale, a bit of pumice, perlite, sand, and crushed leca in it. And this plant is doing astoundingly well. The smaller one, not so much, maybe just a weak plant. But I expect this guy to be flowering profusely towards summertime and to catch plenty of bugs out of the air. The last thing I have out here is the bigger Sarracenia. These plants I helped a friend divide. We're selling them at the markets. Well, right now we have a sea of flowers, and the Sarracenia regia. Got a few leucophilas in here, bit of Citrusina, a few hybrids, and a big army of Drosera binata. I believe it's the Multifidia extrema. Not too clued up on these Australian multifid guys. We have some incredible dark red flowers, a few yellows from the flower of our Renata. I'm really excited to see how these shape up in the next couple of weeks, but so far not a lot to look at, but should be great. Anyway, thank you so much for joining on my tour, and I'll see you next time.